to hear him up there playing songs about essentially being haunted by the past while walking into the future, it lets you sort of know emotionally that there's going to be an other side,
Yeah.
that you will get through the thing that has, all these things that have so weighed us down this last year, and for many of us, myself at least, the last 4 years, where you felt like, man, I don't know if like January 2021 is that a real thing? Or is it like Candyland, like a thing that you think might be real, you hope is real, but you really have no chance.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Set Lusting Bruce, your podcast all about Bruce Springsteen, his music, and mostly his fans. I am your host, Jesse Jackson, and joining me tonight is going to be a fun one. I have a podcaster, writer, Springsteen fan, and it just found out we are members of the mutual admiration society of the Great Lawrence Block. So, Todd Goldberg, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I did not know that this was a dream of mine until you approached me about being on the show, and I went and I listened to like 75 episodes and
you're exaggerating, right?
95. Okay. And I had some serious arguments with some people.
Yes.
Some discussions I want to have. I think Jay Armstrong might be wrong about a lot of things.
Yes, that's great.
No, I absolutely love the show. And the thing about writers is that we're all failed musicians, or we all wish that we were musicians.
Yes.
So whenever a bunch of novelists get in a room together, we don't talk about writing books. We talk about Springsteen and Neil Young and Jason Isbell and all of our singer-songwriters that we love, because we don't have the body to stand up on stage,
right?
And we can't do anything in 4 minutes or less, I assure you.
Well, I don't know if you've listened, but the writer Ron Martz joined me, and he talked about that Springsteen and Stephen King, his two big influences on his writing. And so I had a friend, a guy who's a fan of my Doctor Who podcast, said that I don't know if you do a Springsteen podcast as much as you do a podcast where you talk to interesting people and the host happens to love Bruce Springsteen. So I said, I don't know, but I am so glad. And Todd, it is in some ways, I guess, embarrassing, but I am always searching. Like if I've run into someone on Twitter that makes a comment about Bruce or music or Darkness on the Edge of Town, or or I can't believe that people are playing Born in the USA outside Trump's hospital room. Do they not understand this song? I immediately like, hey, I do a Springsteen podcast. You want to join me?
I have to say, one of the great enduring things about America is misunderstanding Born in the USA.
Yes.
If there's one thing that Americans can agree on, it's like Dolly Parton is a goddamn saint.
Yes.
And 95% of people don't understand what Born in the USA is about, except for the 5% of 50-year-old white dudes who are going to tell you what you misunderstood.
I'm sure you were watching Saturday Night Live with me as we're recording this. This will probably come out in January, but as we're recording this, it's the Wednesday after the band was on Saturday Night Live, and I was like, well, someone said they should just let him play the whole hour and a half, and I'm like, well, I don't disagree. Though I think the Dolly Parton sketch in Weekend Update was pretty damn funny.
It was. The thing about Springsteen on Saturday Night Live, there's two things. One, it made me feel really good. After everything that we have gone through in 2020, and now that this is going to air in 2021, people, we made it through. Oh my
Yes.
God, we
Right.
we made it. Like if this is actually airing,
Yes.
we made it through.
Yes, indeed. Yes.
So to hear him up there playing songs about essentially being haunted by the past
Yes.
while walking into the future, it lets you sort of know emotionally that there's going to be an other side,
Yes.
that you will get through the thing that has, this all these things that have so weighed us down this last year, and for many of us, myself at least, the last 4 years, where you felt like, man, I don't know if like January 2021 is that a real thing? Or is it like Candyland, like a thing that you think might be real, you hope is real, but you really have no chance of seeing it.
Well, I've been very vocal, Todd, that when we first started getting rumors there might be a new album, I consistently said if we can get a new Springsteen album in October, a new president in November, maybe 2020 will not be the worst year ever. And I realize I'm saying that with a little bit of tongue in cheek because not to make light of all the suffering and death we've had, but it's kind of like a little bit of ray of sunshine,
Yeah.
and it never fails. One of my podcast partners, like, he sounded a little ragged. I'm like, they haven't played together in 4 years. It's okay, it's all right.
And he's 71.
Exactly, right. And then someone else, made a point that, oh, he's a hypocrite. He do as I say, not as I do. Look at him and little Steven sharing the mic. I'm like, okay, they have been performing together 40 years. And first off, they've been tested. There's all kinds of things.
Right.
It's okay. They just forgot for a moment. It's okay.
I feel like little Steven might have been in Bruce's quarantine,
Yes, exactly. Right.
Particularly because they didn't have the bassist there that night and had to have the replacement. That dude, the replacement bassist who, like, greatest night of his life, right?
Yes.
like you're pulled from AAA and you're starting for Derek Jeter at shortstop. Not bad.
Yeah, and it's funny, right? Because Gary did say on Twitter, like, it just wasn't worth it for him to travel for 2 songs, and so yes, it was very funny and very good. So first off, we're already 10 minutes into this. Tell my audience a little bit about yourself. Give us your elevator speech.
Oh gosh, Navy SEAL. No, first Jewish Navy SEAL.
Yes.
Well, I'm your garden variety, crime writer. So I've published, gosh, I have a new book coming out in February called The Low Desert, and I think that's my 15th or my 16th published book. I come from a family of writers. My brother is also a novelist, Lee Goldberg. I have made a career out of writing about bad guys. That's what I do. I write about bad guys. And my brother, interestingly enough, writes about good guys. And I think if you were to meet us, clearly he's the bad guy and I'm the good guy, but that's okay for another podcast.
Nice. All right, that's nice.
But I come from a family of writers. My mom was a journalist for many, many years. My dad was a TV news anchorman in the Bay Area where I grew up, the San Francisco Bay Area, that is. My sisters are artists and writers. My uncle is a writer. It's the family business, and crime writing specifically is my brother and my family business. But in addition to that, I'm a professor. I started the graduate school in creative writing and writing for the performing arts at University of California, Riverside. I host a long-running podcast with TV actor Ryder Strong and essayist Julia Pistel called Literary Disco that has been around since 2012, which was, I think we recorded it on cuneiform and mailed it to people. And I've made an entire career out of writing. It's been a very cool way to have all of my dreams achieved. All I ever wanted to, well, not all I ever wanted to do. Most all I ever wanted to do was be a writer. If I had my druthers about it, I'd also play first base for the Oakland A's and I do a little quarterbacking for the Raiders, backup quarterback. Like I don't want to get hit, but I can, I'll tell Derek Carr how to read a cover 2 because he doesn't know how. I'll do any of that stuff. I'm happy to help. But writing has always been something that I wanted to do. Music, though, is a huge passion of mine. But I can't play, and I can't sing. I mean, my wife could confirm that I really cannot sing.
Right.
Because I am just constantly walking around the house with noise-canceling headphones on, bellowing lyrics, and she's like, "Yeah, that's not gonna work."
I think it's interesting that writing is the family business, and it. I have a friend named Tom Zoller, who is a artist. Has started writing. He's written some My Little Pony comics. He's done 3 or 4 comic series of his own where he's written and drew. And like he talked about growing up, from the moment he could hold a crayon, that he knew the only thing he ever wanted to do was draw. I mean, there was no, like when he was going to college, he wanted to go to the Kubert School. It's like, I have no interest in going to any other university. This is all I want to do. And I think it's kind of neat that you've just have always known you want to write.
Yeah, and the thing is I was profoundly dyslexic as a child. I didn't learn to read until I was over 10 years old.
Okay.
I mean, I was so dyslexic that I thought my name was Dot for a long time. That I was a 6-year-old Southern woman named Dot. But the inability to read for so long, and if you can't read until you're 10 years old, you feel like you're dumb. And
sure,
I
absolutely.
did. I absolutely felt like I was dumb, and was picked on and bullied and all that stuff because I was in those special classes. I was doing all that stuff that didn't make me cool for sure, and also I didn't feel cool because I couldn't read. But this was the 1970s and then the early 1980s. And by 1981, I was in all these special classes at Berkeley and Stanford that my mom had found that were really at the sort of the forefront of teaching kids how to deal with their dyslexia. And by the time I could read, like my creative mind was already intact. Like I would set up my bed with all of my Star Wars action figures, and I would have, I'd have like 100, action figures and army men and all that crap. And I would have these complex stories about their lives going on silently in my head, laid out across my bed. And so even before I could read and before I could write, I had narrative. And that's probably because I was read to a lot as a child. I watched a lot of TV, as we all did. But there's a lot of studies that talk about how dyslexics view the world and how dyslexics understand narrative structure from a very young age, because they have to in order to make sense of the world, to make sense of the chaos of story, basically. And so once I was able to read, man, it took off. I was writing stories almost immediately from that point on. And by the time my first book came out in 2000, my first book was a novel called Fake Liar Cheat. I'd already published 50 or 60 stories and a bunch of essays and stuff, and I was only 29. But I felt then that that I was in a race to make up for those years where I couldn't read and I couldn't write. And I've never viewed writing as a chore. I view it as a joy because I know what it means to not have it, And I think that changes my point of view as a writer. I think it also changes my point of view as a teacher of writing. Like what we have is a gift, this thing that we do. And not everybody has that gift.
That's well said. And I was lucky. I learned to read fairly early. I don't not before kindergarten or anything. I can vaguely remember, going through the C. Jane, C. Spot kind of books. But I always was a quick, once I learned to read, I was very quick, and I grew up reading tons of comic books.
Mhm.
And like, my my mom to this day says that you know Jesse would spend his last dollar on buying a book for a kid because he just read books so much as a kid.
Right.
So I had that passion, and I want to spend a little more time talking about writing, but my Bruce fans are going, okay, Jesse, enough of the writing. Let's talk about it. So you grew up in California, Todd.
Mhm.
Was your family musical? Were there a lot of music fans there?
No, so my older brother Lee just has the worst taste in music. All he listens to are TV soundtracks, and so he was crap for me
Okay.
growing up.
All
Like
right.
he wasn't able to deliver
A
anything
lot of
for
Mike
me.
Post and
Yes, yes, like literally Mike Post.
Okay.
Just
Believe it or not, I'm
yes,
walking on air.
just unimaginably bad taste.
Okay.
And then I have two older sisters as well, and they were a lot of Sean Cassidy, a lot of Rick Springfield, a lot of Crystal Gale was being
Sure.
played in the house. My mom was a big band fan, and it's funny. A lot of times when I've listened to your show, people talk about their parents being big band fans, but my mom actually dated Artie Shaw
Oh,
for a number of
interesting.
years, so she wasn't just a fan.
Yeah.
she really got into it, as it were.
Mhm.
But music was not huge for them, but it was for me. And in the Bay Area at the time, there's some great classic rock, or what's now classic rock stations: KFRC, KFOG, the Quake, which was a modern rock station. And so pretty early on, I started to listen to a lot of music. I can remember the one cool thing about my brother is he's 9 years older than me, and he got the first Ramones record. Like, I don't know how, he probably stole it or got it from Columbia House or something, and he didn't like it, and I was into it. Like, he was playing it, and I'd sit outside his door. Like, he'd go from ELO to the Ramones, and I'd be like, turn off that ELO, let's hear some more of the Ramones. And I was like, I really like this, Beat on the Brat. And my brother's like, you like this? Here, you can have this record. And so I would listen to that first Ramones record over and over and over again. I was like 9 years old. But my musical taste when I was very young, was just whatever top 40 was on the radio. And then by the time I was, 12, 13, 14, it was the 80s. So I was big into new wave and punk. Like, those were my favorites. And in the Bay Area, you got to see lots of shows. But also because I had an older sister, I ended up seeing Rick Springfield and Corey Hart a lot.
Sure.
So I can sing you any song from the Rick Springfield catalog if you like, including She Called Me Bruce. But yeah, I was always into sort of modern rock at the time. And I tell you, I know exactly when I got into Bruce, which is when Dancing in the Dark came out. But I had to pretend that I wasn't into it. It came out in '84. I was 13. I was walking around school with a Bauhaus shirt on, as though I'd ever listened to Bauhaus before, but I had the shirt. I was deep into the Thompson Twins and Depeche Mode and all that stuff, and I just loved Dancing in the Dark. I just loved it. But I couldn't tell anyone, because that was uncool. But I remember going to Record Factory in downtown Walnut Creek and getting that record, and playing it constantly. And I had heard Hungry Heart, I think, for sure before that, because I'd been hit a couple years before, so I knew that one. But I didn't even really know, like, when I heard or was aware of, Born to Run or Darkness or any of that stuff, because Dancing in the Dark was my entry drug. And then I worked backwards from that over the next 40 years.
Well, it's always weird asking this question, and it's even weirder when I ask for a writer, but can you articulate what about Dancing in the Dark spoke to you?
Yeah, I can. And of course it changes,
Right.
What I knew then is that I really liked that it was using that overproduced keyboard sound of the 80s that was prevalent in all the new wave that I liked. You know, Bruce was smart, or John Landau was smart, and programmed it to sound like crappy 80s new wave. So that was nice. But I liked the desperation. You know, it's a unhappy song set to a happy beat.
Yes.
And when I was 13 years old, you know, as in the 19 minutes you and I have been talking, you can probably tell I'm a fairly happy person.
Yes.
But when I was 13 years old, you know, I was a depressed kid wearing all black,
Yeah.
walking around, and, you know, but I was still feeling pretty happy most of the time, but, you know, dealing with depression at the same time and dealing with issues of, you know, being the kid that was dumb for all those years.
Yeah.
Dancing in the Dark, for some reason, even then, I was like, this is a song about creatively being frustrated creatively.
Yes.
And it's, you know, of course, it's that line, I'm sick of sitting around here trying to write this book. In the subsequent you know, 30 odd years,
Yes.
that line, sick of sitting around here trying to write this book, really speaks to me.
Yes, I bet it does. Yes.
But I always like sad songs that that feel happy when you're listening to them, and you don't realize it until later. I mean, I don't know if you're ever a fan of David Berman from the Silver Jews. He put out a record under the name Purple Mountains that came out last year, and then he committed suicide. And the Purple Mountains record, man, every song is upbeat. You can dance to it. You can walk around your house and feel great. And it is a 10-song suicide letter.
Wow.
I mean, it is the most depressing thing you've ever heard. And in a way, it's sort of analogous to how I write. You know, I often write about sad people doing terrible things, and I try to put an entertaining spin on it. You know, for all the books I've written on all these different characters, I'm not ever really writing about a person who's happy. I'm writing about a person who's trying to get happy, and not in a sort of Danny Partridge sort of way.
Yeah. Yeah. I shared with you that I picked up Gangster Land when I saw you tweet about Bruce, and you're nice enough, like, yeah, I'll be in your show. I'm like, okay, well, if you say you're going to be on my show, you get at least one book bought from me. I'm good, you know. And we will talk about Brad Meltzer in a little bit, but right, he makes that joke. I don't care what your politics. If you send me a fan letter, and you're president, you get a free book, right? Is one of his jokes. And I really enjoyed your book, and I tweeted you, right? Like there's two main characters of the book, and I'm going to do this injustice, but basically a mafia hitman, due to circumstances, has to go hide, and he ends up being a Jewish rabbi in Las Vegas. And the other character is the FBI guy that's searching for him. And I said, I don't know which guy I'm supposed to like, because to a certain degree, Sal, who is the hitman, is almost on a quest for redemption,
Right.
you know, the way you're writing it. And the FBI guy maybe is willing to do anything he can, no matter how scrupulous or not, to kind of right a wrong that happened. And I don't want to start too much story. So I was both feeling the thing, and you said, well, you'll figure it out. And I did, because of the book. So I'm really looking forward to the second book in that, you know, two set. So I like the idea that your characters are complex, and there is, and I think that in really good TV shows or movies or literature, your good guy isn't necessarily good and your bad guy isn't necessarily bad, is what
Right.
makes something good.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And you're leaving out a very important part of the book for the listeners of your show, which is that the actual plot of this book hinges on Bruce Springsteen. That there is
Yes.
that by the end of the book, knowledge of Bruce Springsteen is very, very important.
Yes, there is.
We won't reveal that, but
no, there is. That is a very, yeah, and it is very interesting. The character quotes him, and it's really well done. I liked it a lot, and you know, it's cool. So I'm going to go back to Bruce for a minute,
Mhm.
and I promise we're going to get back to writing too. So you said you've got Dancing in the Dark, so you've got the Born in the USA.
Right.
I assume CD.
No,
Is
this was
cassette.
1984.
So a
So
cassette.
yeah, I had the cassette. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
I might have had the record.
Yes.
I might have had the record.
Hmm.
Either I did or my sister did, because I can all of a sudden I can see myself sitting on the floor looking at the picture while listening to it.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And by the way, your description about him trying to find himself, I last week I talked to a guy who is a massive Bee Gees fan.
Mm-hmm.
It was we talked an hour and a half, and he is actually trying to do a Springsteen and I documentary, except Bee Gees and I.
Oh,
And
that'd be good.
but yeah,
I
it
just watched
was,
that documentary 2 nights ago.
yes, and yeah, and I thought about that. I've never put that connection for, but the John Travolta character in Saturday Night Fever could be singing "Dancing in the Dark."
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think the thing about the Born in the USA album as an entry drug, um, is it's sort of like a greatest hits record of everything that's come before it too. Like you get a
Yeah.
taste. Like if you like the anthems on Born in the USA, well, you're gonna like Born to Run, right?
Yes.
If you like My Hometown, you're gonna like Darkness on the Edge of Town. Whatever it might be.
Yeah.
If you hate, what song do I hate? I don't really like Darlington County on that song. So if you hate Darlington County, you might hate, something else. Candy's Room. I don't
Right.
know. And so, like once I got hooked on it, and once I started to really listen to the lyrics and pay attention to the characters in it, and this is the important thing for me, is like I really like a story song. I really like a narrative-driven song. This is why I'm a big fan of Jason Isbell, is that, I believe that they are, they're conjoined twins separated by 35 years or so.
Absolutely.
Is, every story or every song that he writes, there's a narrative, and maybe it reveals something about the author also, but it's also somehow applicable to your own life. And so the thing that really sealed the deal for me on I'm Born in the USA was actually I'm on Fire. A very simple song, a very creepy song, a sort of a crime novel of a song. Like
Yes.
like, who's this dude?
Right.
Why is he feeling this way? It's a whole vibe. And what I remember really specifically is that song made me want to write. And this is an interesting thing for me, is like a lot of times I'm constantly playing music when I'm working. But even then, like a song would turn on something emotional in my head and make me want to go explore that thing. And for a long, long time, I had this desire, like, man, I want to write a book that's like a Springsteen album, like that's what I want. I want that vibe, whatever that thing is. And of course, that vibe is different for every single person. That vibe is that thing that happens inside of you. And it's filled by your experiences and your emotions and your traumas and passions and all that stuff. But like, that was a thought that was like, oh, I want people to feel this way when they're reading the book. And interestingly enough, when I wrote Gangster Land, and I wrote that in 2012 and it came out in 2014, I was sort of at a career crossroads, and I saw that documentary, I think it must have been on HBO, something like that, where it's the making of Darkness on the Edge of Town, and Bruce is talking about, how Born to Run was his shot, like he was swinging for the fences with it. And I remember thinking, man, I'm going to do that. I'm going to swing for the fences. I'm going to take my shot. Like I was already deep into my career. I'd already published 8-9 books at that point, and I hadn't broken big. I had a good career, but I hadn't broken big. And I was like, I'm gonna take my shot. I'm gonna write my Born to Run, and it's gonna be about this hitman rabbi.
Yes.
And if you look at the front page of the book, if you look at the dedication to my wife, whose name is Wendy, and so therefore I was bound to be a Bruce Springsteen fan.
Yes.
It's a quote from Born to Run. And someday, girl, we're gonna make it. And that was my shot. And so from Dancing in the Dark all the way through, like those records ended up inspiring me to this thing in my career. And it seems silly to say it, but Bruce Springsteen was an influence on this choice I made to write this book. and that's why he plays such a pivotal role in the novel itself.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. You may have heard this because you were nice enough to say you've listened to a couple of other podcasts with me, but I feel like Western Stars is could be a collection of Elmer Leonard short stories.
Yeah, for sure.
It has that feel.
Yeah.
And so I appreciate the idea that in his music is very it is very visual, right? He does create characters, and they're my buddy Sam and I talked about that often the women in his songs have a past.
Right.
We often will talk about, we'll like we'll drop your kids off at your mom. Now I realize that's not his song, but he'll talk about like in Glory Days after she puts the kids to bed, there will be this. So as you're going through, are you listening to the other albums? Are you?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I had, and this is probably true for a lot of people, like, so from 13 to 18, I probably wasn't listening to it, I wasn't getting obsessed, right? Because I was too busy listening to the Replacements,
Right.
But I was working in record stores. I always worked in record stores. My entire, shiftless life, I worked in record stores.
Okay.
And so I was getting into all the old stuff and listening to it. And my uncle, who's a writer, but before he was a writer, he was a big DJ in Seattle. Like he was the Howard Stern of Seattle in the 60s and 70s. His name is Burl Bear. And I remember we had gone fishing together up in Spokane, and he was like, well, what are you listening to right now? And I was probably 16 or 17 at the time, and I was getting into I'd moved from British goth to American punk or Replacements type stuff. And so I was like, oh, I'm into the Replacements. I'm listening to REM. I'm Husker Du, all these bands. Things like everything that you think that they're doing that's new comes from one guy, and that one guy is Bruce Springsteen. Like if you think Paul Westerberg is talking about the working man and the middle class, you got to go listen to Born to Run, not just the song, listen to the whole album. Go listen to Darkness. Go listen to Nebraska specifically. And so I remember, like, when I was 17 years old, going and getting Darkness on the Edge of Town and listening to that because I liked the title. Basically, I was like, that's a cool title. Listening to that whole record and being completely blown away, and also recognizing, like, oh yeah, like this is a very clear aesthetic line from Darkness on the Edge of Town to Soul Asylum or whatever, right? And I was also into like Jane's Addiction and bands like that as well. But so then going from Darkness and then getting into The River, and it was probably, I was probably 20, 21 when I started obsessively listening to The River, like to the point where people were like, and not just the record, like specifically the song, like over and over and over and over again, trying to divine what I do not know. And so it was sort of a steady indoctrination. And then by the time I was about 25, so I'm 49 now, just to give you a timeline. By the time I was 25, my lovely wife, who at the time was my lovely girlfriend, like all we played in the house was Springsteen and Neil Young's Harvest Moon record. Like that was like, somehow that became the soundtrack in our house as I was, as we had just moved in with each other. And I don't know why, and I don't know how, but a song like Brilliant Disguise became a song that we both loved. And it's not really a song that young lovers should have in common, but just like Bruce says, it's a song that changes in time depending upon who you hear it with and who you sing it with. But like that, and then it became that era, in the late 1990s, mid to late 1990s, I really got into Tunnel of Love. Like when people weren't into Tunnel of Love, I was deep into Tunnel of Love.
Okay, sure.
And I really liked, Lucky Town and Human Touch. And I like some of those songs on those records are hard to hear because they have the bad late 90s production. But by that point, it became my soundtrack for writing. I was
Okay.
starting my career, and it was just always on in the background. And then I just became just a total obsessive. I just lost it.
Is there one moment where you kind of tipped over, or was it just a series of just listening, and all of a sudden you've become this passionate fan?
I don't know. I mean, I think probably there comes a point where you stop caring what other people think,
Right.
And so when I was into punk music and all that stuff, like, it wasn't cool for me to be like, hey, did you guys listen to Darkest on the Edge of Town? Did you guys listen to The River? Like, no,
Yeah.
we didn't. We were at the Suicidal Tendency show,
Right.
And so once you stop caring what anyone thinks about your musical
Mhm.
taste, then it became
Yeah.
a lot easier. And then it turned out that all my friends were into it at the same time too.
Okay.
So probably in my mid 20s, so probably 25,
Mhm.
26, when I was living with my girlfriend who had become my wife. And you start to hear different things in the songs. You start to want different things. I was less interested in gangster rap at that point, and more interested in a person talking about the feelings that I had. And this is the interesting thing about sort of the evolution of fandom for Bruce Springsteen. First, you like him for the anthems, and then you like him for how he's able to talk about the trauma and the human experience. And so, of course, different songs hit at different times. Now, that being said, Wrecking Ball is always terrible, but um, but there's always you find something new depending upon when you're looking for it. So I would say, mid to late 20s is when I really became an obsessive. And I've waxed and waned some in the intervening years, but it really kicked up big again after or when The Rising came out.
Right.
Because there'd been that lull, obviously, and so I'd been
Yes.
listening to all the old stuff. And The Rising kicked my ass, man. I didn't expect it. I didn't expect
Yeah.
that it would make me feel the way that it did. I didn't expect the artistry to be where it was. I didn't expect the artistic choices that he made from the Middle Eastern influence in some of the songs, like all the
Sure.
stuff. Like he was pulling it all together again for the first time, and you really felt for me, like, that was a record where I was like, oh yeah, it doesn't matter that he's a multimillionaire rock star. He's feeling the same sort of existential things that we all are at this point.
Yeah. I had a guest, Daniel, I believe is his name, talked about, and I've repeated this on multiple episodes. He said he was at the reunion tour, in '99,
Mm-hmm.
and he said in his mind, this is it. This is the peak of my Springsteen fandom.
Right.
Like, they may tour in the future, they'll get together every once in a while, but this is as good as it's ever going to get. And he said if there was no way he could picture the next 20 years
Yeah.
of Rising, the Seeger sessions,
Mm-hmm.
Obviously it doesn't sound like you like Wrecking Ball, but Wrecking Ball, Western Stars, the film, Broadway, and now Letter to You.
Yeah.
Like, oh my goodness, where, what a second half of a career,
It's amazing.
Yeah.
It's amazing. And I mean, clearly there's some duds, like
Yeah.
we can all recognize that not every song is great, but that's true for anyone. Like,
Yeah.
and I think the thing that what the current record shows is that when he's focused and feeling something deep and emotional and has something important to say, man, it's going to come out and you're going to feel it, and it's going to arrive with some power. I just don't get that vibe when he's singing about the destruction of the Meadowlands.
So, and I think because it was on 3 years ago, I was diagnosed with colon cancer. I'm
oh
fine.
my gosh.
But that was on my playlist. The whole "Give Me Your Best Shot,"
Right.
see what you got from that, persona. What I find interesting, right, is Joyce Millman is she's done TV writing and a critic, and when Western Stars came out, she wrote a really beautiful column about why it wasn't the album she wanted.
Mm-hmm.
And I had her on the podcast, and she explained that she wanted a magic
Yeah.
for the Trump administration. And she just wrote this beautiful column about maybe Bruce knew better than I did, because I like the idea in Letter to You. There's a few comments about Trump, but he didn't go overboard. It's just focusing on this.
Right.
Um, the only time I've gotten angry, because I have no problem if someone says, they didn't like Western Stars, they just didn't get it, or I
Right.
didn't get the Seeger Sessions, or I didn't like Devils and Dust, or I didn't like Wrecking Ball, I didn't like the Irish Did, or whatever. The only time I got mad is someone on Facebook on Sunday posted that we should all admit that Letter to You is not very good. He doesn't have his voice
Oh my
anymore.
God.
And
Tonight we ride.
and he said, and he needs to stop diluting his legacy.
Oh God.
And I went, okay, it's one thing if you don't like the album, but there is nothing this man can do to dilute his legacy.
No.
He has nothing to prove.
Nothing.
I mean,
he would have to actually kill a priest in front of children, and then even still would be like, yeah, but the 71 years before that were pretty great.
Well, right, like I'm thinking, like Bill Cosby destroys his legacy, right? Like Bill Cosby destroyed his legacy, right? But there are people to this day that, despite all the Michael Jackson, they look at his music and he's like, you can't do that. So that's amazing. All right. One of the things I like to preface, Todd, is the amount of times you've seen Bruce is not a fair barometer of how big of a fan you are. But for the record, do you know how many times you've seen him?
I do. I know the exact number.
Okay.
0.
Wow.
I've never seen him live.
Wow.
I know. I don't know how. I was on my own Facebook page, I was talking to people and saying, hey, I'm going to do this thing. And we were talking about Bruce Springsteen, and everyone was like, well, gosh, Todd, how many times have you seen him? 20, 30 times? And I was like, I've never seen him, which is strange because when I like a band, I see them a lot. And I don't know how I've never seen Springsteen. Like, he came through LA. He comes to LA for every tour. He played 20 nights on the River Tour or whatever it was. And for some reason, I have never seen him. And I don't know how this has happened. And it feels strange. Like sitting right here next to me, I've got the signed copy of the memoir. I'm surrounded by paraphernalia, and I have no idea how it is that I've never seen him live.
Has it become a superstitious, or
no?
Or it's just circumstances?
Yeah, I actually know, like, the last time he came through Southern California. So I run an MFA program at UC Riverside, as I mentioned, and we have a residency period, a 10-day residency period, where all my students come to town, and we teach for 10 days. And like his 10 nights at the LA Coliseum or wherever it was were during those 10 days. And I was like, how can this be? how can this be? I've seen the Rolling Stones. I've seen Neil Young. I've seen all the biggest ones I ever wanted to see, all the brand name bands, and then of course all the tiny little ones. Because where I live also, this is important, there's a great roadhouse called Pappy and Harriet's that holds maybe 150 people in it, and every touring band on earth does a surprise show out there. And so I get to drive up into the desert and see, someone awesome at Pappy and Harriet's. But I have never seen Springsteen. But I do have a good story about my brother not seeing Springsteen.
Okay, please share.
Which is that my uncle, who I mentioned before, my Uncle Burl, he was this big DJ in Seattle. And my brother, who's 10 years older than me, was staying with him up in Seattle. And my uncle had, free tickets to go because he was going to come out and say, ladies and gentlemen, Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band, because he was the big DJ. And so he says to my brother, hey, do you want to come see Springsteen with me? And my brother says, no, there's a Woody Allen movie on TV I want to watch that night. And my uncle's like, you're going to stay home and watch a Woody Allen movie? instead of going to see Bruce Springsteen. My brother's like, yeah, I don't really know the songs. And my uncle was like, it doesn't matter if you don't know the songs.
Right.
And this was like 1979 or something like that. And now it's just this thing, like my brother, instead of going to see Springsteen, stayed home to watch, Manhattan or something.
Yeah.
So at least I don't have that weighing me down, that I had the choice and was like, I'm going to stay home and watch Friends.
Well, so it's not quite as good, but I had a guy a couple weeks ago, and his episode hasn't come out yet, but his name's Bud, and he lives in Alabama, and it was a great conversation. But he talked about that he was going to school in Auburn when Bruce was touring. And at the time he had long hair and he kind of looked like Bruce.
Oh, gosh.
So he tells the story that he pretended to be Bruce at the student union and actually signed autographs. Then later the student paper talked about it.
Oh, God.
So he's friends with the head of the student union that's putting on the show, and he finds him and the day of the show, and they're like, oh, come on back. And so they come back and the band's all around, and so he's getting to talk to him, and Bruce finally comes and, have you heard? And Bruce said, yeah, I heard that. That's pretty funny. You kind of do look like me. And there's give and take back and forth, and it's really great.
Oh, wow.
And Bud says, here is his great regret. They click, and after the show, hey, you got to come to the after show party. And so I don't remember if it was Bruce as he told the story, but a couple of band members said, hey, why don't you ride with us? We've got another couple of shows over the next 3 or 4 days. You can go with us. And Bud goes, yeah, I've got class.
Oh, my God.
And he's like, what was I thinking, Jesse? I wasn't that good of a student. I mean,
oh, my God. Oh, my God.
So
someone needs to find Bud and shake him. Poor Bud.
Yeah. So Bud, I said, I wonder if you can call now Barbara or somebody and go, hey, like in 76, 77, he offered me. So like, can I take that up now?
Oh, man.
Oh, that's funny.
Oh, that's a horror story, Jesse.
Yes, it was. It's great. I want to talk for a minute. We mentioned before you recorded, there is a series of books that Lawrence Block did, that Keller, it's about a hitman. And I mean, if you've never read the books, you're going to think this is weird, but he is the protagonist and he is the hero, and you end up cheering for him, even though he is a contract killer. And, Hit and Run is one of my favorite books, where he ends up building a whole life in New Orleans for himself. So you mentioned Lawrence Block is actually an influence. One of my favorite stories, and then I'm going to let you talk, is he was at a book signing here in Dallas, and it was a point where Scudder and Elaine, and I don't remember the book, but at the end of the book, Elaine basically tells Scudder that, hey, I love you and you're loving me as much as I want. I'm getting everything. And so I asked Mr. Block, I said, I think Elaine knows that, Matt's cheating on her, but she doesn't care.
Right.
And he said, I think that too, but I'm not sure yet. And I was like, that told me so much about writing, So he truly is one of my favorite writers. And just, I have read, the Burglar books, the Scudder books, and everything. So please share how you got to be friends with your young adults.
Well, the first thing you need to know is that all crime novelists know each other.
Okay.
It's a good club to be in, because everyone has good taste in whiskey, so that's a good part of it. That's part of the honest fact, is like we all have the same job.
Yes.
And so we end up running in some of the same circles. But so my fandom with Lawrence Block goes back literally until I was, till about the time I heard Dancing in the Dark, 1983, 1984. My brother had gone off to college, and he left me with 2 big bags of books. and it was Lawrence Block, and it was Donald Westlake, and it was Jim Thompson, and it was Ross McDonald, it was Robert Parker. It was sort of the history of American noir and detective fiction. And I had just learned to read, and those books, they're pretty easy to read. It's not, not a lot of complex metaphors to I walked up and shot a guy in the head. And
Robert Parker Spencer books are very, they are all dialogue. They are fun.
All dialogue.
It is like eating potato chips. I just love.
Yeah. And Robert Parker was a huge influence on me too. I'm right now, if I turned my computer around, I could show you a photo of a teenage me and Robert Parker and him signing my copy of A Catskill Eagle, which I keep on my little cork board. But so, I was reading those books as my young adult fiction. That was like, John Green wasn't a thing, in 1983.
Yes, exactly.
So if you wanted to read books, you were reading adult fiction or you're reading kids' books. And so I read all of those books and just inhaled them. And I've always loved the anti-hero. Anti-heroes are my thing. And so, Lawrence Block naturally appealed to me. His humor, the depth of his characterizations. So Lawrence Block, Elmore Leonard, Donald Westlake, like that's my Mount Rushmore.
Sure.
And so I always wanted to write about, I wanted the challenge of how do you make a bad guy the hero? Like, how do you make a bad guy in such a way that readers will find empathy in them? And so that was an idea that, had gone in my head for a very long time. And so over the years, I read, probably 60 of his books, just an absolute ton of them. And at the same time, my brother, who I mentioned, he started publishing books as well. And he and Lawrence Block became friends. And then he introduced Lawrence Block to me, and we became friends as well. What I remember most, like, there was a moment in time where I was like, how is this my life? Like, how am I having this experience? We were in Seattle for some sort of book conference. I was there, my brother Lee was there, and Lawrence Block was there. And Lee was like, hey, we should get some dinner. And Lawrence Block was like, oh, can I come along? And I was like, can Lawrence Block come along? Yeah, Lawrence Block can come along. What the fuck? Oh, I almost swore. What the F? Of course, Lawrence Block can come along. And so, like, we're walking to dinner, and we're just sort of talking about, whatever it is we're talking about. And, it's like hearing Scudder talk. You're having a conversation with Scudder as you're walking to the fish place down at the water. And then we're sitting there at dinner, and like, I'm not a shy person. I can talk to anyone. Yeah. And my brother is like me on steroids.
Yes.
So he also not a shy guy, but with terrible musical taste, as noted before. So the three of us are at dinner, and Lee and Lawrence Block are talking, and I'm just like staring at Lawrence Block eating a steak, and Lawrence gets up to go to the bathroom or something, and my brother's like, "Why aren't you talking?" And I was like, "Because I'm 13 years old." And Lawrence Block is at dinner with us. How on earth did this happen?
Yes.
This is absurd. This doesn't make any sense to me. Yeah. And he's like, well, look, you got to get over it, because it's weird that you're just sitting there staring at the man. He's like, you've published 9 books and you're scared to talk to Lawrence Block? And I was like, people didn't have to deal with like having Shakespeare show up after their play,
Yes, exactly.
Talk about stuff. So that was a good moment. But so we became friends, and then last year he contacted me and he said, hey, I'd love for you to write a short story for me for a book that I'm doing about colleges. I want to put together an anthology about crime on college campuses. Will you write something? And so I wrote a short story for him called Goon Number 4, about a Black Ops special Navy SEAL type dude who retires and goes to community college, and the transition is not a smooth one. Okay. but he's the goon in the back. Like, he's not the number 1 hitman. He's like the guy who holds the briefcase.
Okay.
And so I sent him the story, and I was really nervous. Like, I was like, oh God, like, this is just like that story does not exist if I hadn't spent 35 years of my life reading this man's books.
Yes.
And so I sent it off to him, and I don't hear back from him for a couple of days. And I was like, okay, oh God, he hates it. Oh my God, he's gonna have someone contact me and tell me I'm not in the book and send back the money and all that stuff. And he wrote me back. He's like, this is one of the best short stories I've ever read. You should turn this into a novel. This is remarkable. And Jesse, I swear to God, I cried at my desk.
I imagine.
I cried at my desk. I was just like, "Oh my God, Lawrence Block likes me. He really likes me." It's just remarkable. But this is the cool thing. Like when you're in this business, we were all the people that were picked last at kickball. It doesn't matter what age.
Yeah.
Every single crime writer was picked last at kickball, except for Greg Hurwitz. He's always been physically fit. And so we all speak the same sort of language of the loser. And Lawrence Block taught me that.
What's funny is Harlan Coben was here in Dallas doing several years ago, but it was when Bruce was on Broadway.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's doing a book signing and he does a reading, and then he said, "Okay, do we have any questions?" When my hand shoots up right away, and he's like, "Yes, you in the back. Are you getting tickets to see Bruce on Broadway?" and he starts laughing. Goes, "That was not the first question I thought I was going to get." "Yes, I am working to get tickets." I'm like, "Okay, thank you, sir."
Yeah, he's a huge fan. I mean,
yes.
There are of the crime writers that I know, I think the majority are Bruce Springsteen fans because a song like Across the Border, something like that.
Yeah.
It's a noir song. Every song on Devils and Dust is a noir song,
Well, Meeting Across the River, right?
Meeting Across the River.
Yeah, it's just amazing.
There was that anthology that they did of all those crime writers.
Yes, I remember that. Yeah, that's very good. So I do have to share with you, and then we're going to get back to Bruce. I saw that you had co-written a book with Brad Meltzer.
Yes.
And I first found Brad when he was replacing Kevin Smith on Green Arrow.
Mm-hmm.
Had never heard of him before. Read that, went, "Oh, I should look out this guy's books." Found his books and liked them. And then every time he came to Dallas, I'd end up being the fat kid asking a comic book question, right? And then and we would always talk a few minutes on comics. And then one night he was selling t-shirts for some charity, and I volunteered to sell the t-shirts. So it's reached the point where now, Brad remembers me.
Right.
And when I talked about like 3 years ago, when I had put on Twitter that I was fighting colon cancer, he DM'd me and said, are you okay? And I'm like, yeah. So certainly not friends, but when he sees me at the book signing, he goes, "Okay, what's your question, Jesse?" Right?
That's nice.
So I'm like, please don't say he's a jerk. Please don't say he's a jerk, because, from my perspective, he is just this wonderful guy.
Brad is like a brother to me.
Yeah.
He is.
By the way, I love Joel's book.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. We had a lot of fun working on it. And we want to do more of them, but we both have the champagne problem of having successful things that we're doing.
Yes.
We have it all plotted out and everything.
Yeah.
So Brad is what you see is what you get. I mean, the dude's a gem. I love him like a brother. We don't get to talk as often as either of us would like, but when we do talk, it's like picking up the conversation 5 minutes before. As soon as I get done with this, I will text him because he will be awake.
Yeah.
But here's what you need to know about Brad. He is everything that you imagine the biggest geek on earth could possibly be.
Yes. Yes.
His obsessions are real, and they are fanatical. And what he has done with his entire career is live out all of his childhood fantasies.
Yeah.
And if you're with him and he knows about your childhood fantasy, he's going to make it happen for you. He's like a walking, talking Make-A-Wish Foundation. He's a wonderful dude. I love him. I love his family. I love his wife. I love his kids. And here's the thing. Brad Meltzer changed my life. When he approached me to work on the House of Secrets together, he was like, I need some help with something, and you need some help with something. And it was true. I needed to learn how to write commercial fiction, and he wanted to understand character better. He didn't feel like he wrote character as well as he should or could.
I remember him saying that in an interview. Of course, at that time, I did not know you, and we had not connected, but he said, Todd's really good at character, right? And
Yeah,
I'm really good at plotting. And
exactly. And he really taught me how to plot, and he taught me how to write commercial fiction. And I feel like I taught him how to do character, so that when when the Escape Artist came out, I was like, dude, you listened.
yes,
like you got it. Zig is a great character, and you understand how to write an outlandish story centered on a real person. And
right.
that was the thing that he knew that he needed help with. And this tells you sort of a bit about the guy. Like, he recognized he had a problem, and he wasn't just going to say, I'm going to James Patterson. I'm just going to hire other people to write my books.
Mhm.
When we wrote House of Secrets up there on my wall, it was a true 100% partnership. And we had to learn how to fight. We had to learn how to disagree. We had to learn how to tell the other person, like, hey man, that sentence sucks.
Yeah.
And that's hard to do, because we're both pretty type A with our own work.
Yeah.
And to have another person's fingers in it, like when it's not done yet, it's an unusual experience. And it was harder than we thought it would be. The reward was great. And I had always been a pretty good selling writer, but the House of Secrets was huge. It was a big, huge bestseller. It was on the bestseller list for 6 weeks or something, and it changed my life. And it opened my eyes to some other possibilities for stuff that I can do in the future. And he's the biggest cheerleader I've ever had. If I needed bail money right now, he would probably give it to me before my brother would.
Well, that's because you keep criticizing your brother's musical taste. I now feel like I have to have him on the show.
No. Dude, he wouldn't know a single, he'd be like, so what's your favorite Bruce Springsteen song? And he'd be like, Jesse's Girl. I really like Jesse's Girl. I like Summer of '69. That's another good one. And Pink Houses. I'm a big Pink Houses fan.
There you go.
No, Brad's a gem. I can't wait to tell him that I met you.
That's good. And I will be crushed if he goes, I don't know who that guy is.
He's like, Jesse? No.
No, don't know who that guy. So I can't ask you my normal question is there a song you're chasing on a live show? Because you would say all of them.
All of them, yeah. All of them, every single one. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I listened to all the live records. I watched all the YouTube videos.
Yes.
I saw him sing Royals by Lorde.
Yes.
What more do you want from me?
Exactly. By the way, when I had the BG expert, I did have to talk about him doing Staying Alive.
Yeah, that's not a good version of Staying Alive. That is, I will say, the song that I wish I'd seen him play live, is his cover of Purple Rain. Yeah. I'm fascinated by that performance, to be perfectly honest with you, because it actually serves a sort of a larger national purpose. Like it is a moment of such profound public mourning that it exists as sort of a funeral, like seeing Bruce Springsteen sing Purple Rain. You're like, oh, well, of course he knows Purple Rain.
Yeah.
Of course he loved Purple Rain, but it never would have entered your mind before that he had liked it.
And every band member is wearing purple.
Yeah.
Some shade of purple on some pearl clothing. And then you hear afterwards, Prince had said in an interview that you learn from the best. Like he would be backstage watching the E Street Band perform and would be taking notes. And I guess in the same way, crime fiction writers, right? Robert Krauss or Lawrence Block, or, whoever, to a certain degree, musicians are a small family too.
Yeah.
Right. So, and there's, I know one of the things that once on Twitter, Jason, someone asked the question, who's a musician who did a big favor for you? And Jason Isbell replied, Bruce Springsteen. And immediately, okay, we want to hear that story. And he's like, no, I'm not going to tell that story.
Right.
And, and the closest to a substance issue I have is fighting my calories and, and being overweight. But um, it gets easier, but it's never easy. On the
Right.
new album, just spoke to me. Like, that song has so much truth in it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that new Jason Isbell album is something, and it actually pairs up really well with the new Bruce record because they're both about being haunted.
Yes,
They're
they
both
are.
about ghosts, and ghosts come in a lot of different varieties. And I think emotional vulnerability is the thing that connects you to between art and the purveyor of art is the thing that connects.
Yeah.
And so that's why, like, that Purple Rain moment, when he plays Purple Rain, you're like, oh, okay, game respects game, we got that.
Yeah.
Oh, he's gonna play it really, really, really well.
Yeah.
Miles is gonna hit that solo like no one's ever played it before.
Exactly.
Like,
Yeah.
like there's two people that can play that. One of them just died, and the other
Yeah.
one's playing it right now.
Yeah.
And to pay such profound respect and not be afraid of showing concrete human emotion in the simplest form possible, which is to honor that person by using their art. That's so powerful. And I think that's what Bruce has, it's what Jason Isbell has, but it's what great art does no matter what, is it makes you feel like you're not alone in this world with whatever struggle that you have. And that song, that it gets easier but it's not easy, you can he's talking about his sobriety, you're thinking about it as it relates to your personal health. I think about it as it relates to my personal health. I think about it as it relates to letting go of anger, of something that
Yes.
I've been pissed off about for 25 years. Like, I'm going to stop being mad at my mom, I'm going to stop being mad at my dad, they're both dead, I should have a good relationship with them now.
Right.
Whatever it might be.
Exactly.
And it sometimes it takes art to be the thing that makes you make that decision. And that's a powerful weight that artists bear. But as a writer, particularly these last 4 years, I do a lot of opinion writing. I write a lot of op-eds and essays and things like that for newspapers. And I feel like it's important to do. And people say, like, well, aren't you afraid you're going to alienate some portion of your audience? Well, my audience is not as important as my humanity or my sense of empathy or what's right and what's wrong. And so if I get out and in front of an issue of anti-Semitism and write an essay in a major newspaper about it, I'm not cared if anti-Semites are going to buy my books. Like,
right.
Hey, go ahead, keep your money. But I believe artists have to stand up and speak for those that are unwilling or unable to talk for whatever reason. It could be emotional, it could be traumatic, it could be physical.
Well, I get a joke. I'm amused by people on Facebook or Twitter and other social media that will go to Little Steven, or who's very active on Twitter.
That one
say,
the other day was bad.
Yeah, right, like, okay, this is why I'm not listening to you anymore, because you guys should keep your politics out of it.
Right.
And my first thought is, have you not listened to any of the music?
Right.
And the idea that because I'll share that I'm a huge comic book fan, and I was young enough, I was that Lois and Clark was as close to, we had not had a Superman show on TV.
Right.
And Dean Cain is kind of now very conservative and crazy. But he and I've interacted a couple of times on Twitter, and he was always respectful to me, and I don't agree with his politics at all. And I'm like, I don't understand why you can think that way, but that doesn't take away from that cheesy. Like, I had a friend said, his Tom, I was talking about Tom Zoller's book Love and Capes is like Lois and Clark, but not the sucky parts, and so there is that fun. And I think you sometimes have to separate that. I mean,
yeah, if you can. I mean,
yeah, sometimes it's hard to.
Well, like, fortunately, Scott Baio isn't making any art that I want to consume.
Exactly. Right. Yes.
But then, like, there's a new Ryan Adams record out, and I'm like, yeah, I kind of want to hear it, but I'm sort of against pedophiles. So
Yes, exactly. Yeah,
as a general rule, I try not to give pedophiles my money.
exactly. So, Todd, you've shared Tunnel of Love, which I agree with you. Someone once told me on the podcast, you have to have your heart broken, or you have to have been through a relationship for a while to enjoy Tunnel of Love.
Mm-hmm.
You certainly have talked about Born in the USA, your gateway. Are there other albums or songs that you go back to
Oh
on a regular
gosh.
basis?
So you know how Spotify tells you your top song at the end of the year?
Yeah.
So I've had Spotify for 5 years or whatever. Every single year, the number somewhere between song number 1 and song number 5 is Brilliant Disguise.
Okay.
I listen to Brilliant Disguise constantly.
Mhm.
All different versions of it. It's my absolute favorite song of his, which is weird. Like I don't know if a lot of people have Brilliant Disguise as their number 1. But like I said, it means different things at different times. And I told you, that there was that time when, my wife and I were just together, we'd play it constantly.
Yeah.
So there's that. Long Walk Home.
Mhm.
I love that one. Play it constantly. It's just an absolute huge favorite of mine. I really love the live version of Trapped.
Yeah.
That's a favorite. I blare that's the windows down in your driving song.
Yes.
I just love it. And I live in the desert, so I get to do a lot of top down, wind whipping through my hair as I drive and think about life. Gosh, I mean, there's so many. I love Youngstown. Youngstown really makes me want to write. That's another one that makes me
Sure.
want to
I could see that.
get into it. Darkness on the Edge of Town. That I can listen to that song over and over and over again. I can listen to The River 60, 70, 80 times in a row.
So I always ask the Mary question.
Mhm.
So I'm going to throw you a curve, and I will still ask you the Mary question. Do you think the couple in the river have a happy marriage?
Well, my friend David is friends with Bruce's wife, or
Okay.
Bruce's sister, rather.
Okay.
So I know that they do.
Right. Yes, I understand that. I understand that in the people that it's based on, but in the song itself, because
No.
I think
No, they do
Okay.
not. No, that song is so powerful to me. That
Yeah.
song, the crescendo of it, it's impossible not to be moved by it, but the crushing sadness of small town desperation and loss and hopelessness, and young marriage, I can't imagine that it comes out well, and very few relationships in a Bruce Springsteen song seem like they're the basis of a really great marriage.
No, I get it. Yeah.
Not a lot of them. But The River itself, like it feels to me, that song reminds me of summer, of those long nights when you're young and everything seems possible and you're a little drunk.
Yeah.
And everything sort of already seems like a memory as it's happening, but you know that it's impermanent, that this is not going to last. That song gives me that feeling. And so I play it when I'm trying to write stories like that.
Okay.
There's a story in my new book that I played that song constantly as I was writing it. And those relationships born out of summer lust rarely last very long. But you want those kids to get out and find something better.
Yeah.
But man, I can't tell you how many times I've listened to that song and asked myself, like, how at that age, because he was 26 when he wrote that song. Like, how did he have that ability at 26 years old to convey that kind of emotion? Like when I was 26, I couldn't do anything.
Right.
I was like,
yes.
Nothing. I did nothing well at 26.
I get it. Yes, there is that talent.
Yeah, and so when I read his memoir, I was like, well, we're going to get to the bottom of this. We're going to find out. Actually, I'll tell you a moment of narcissism. Not that you need any more from me. But so, I read the memoir, and of course I loved it. And I got done with it, and I had a couple thoughts. But the big thought that I had was, well, you know what? I'm a better writer than Bruce Springsteen.
I was going to ask you, as a writer, what do you think of the...
Well, he's very talented. He needed a better editor. I love it. I love it. But it's a book that was written over the course of 20 years. And so he becomes a better writer the further in he gets into the book.
I will tell you, I was a little worried because, and I say this with all love in my heart, if Bruce is listening to this, sometimes he can be a very bad interview.
Right.
Because he seems self-conscious about talking about himself. He seems to be better during this letter to you, like the Apple interview, the guy, I didn't recognize the guy, but he's been on a couple podcasts. I think he's done a good job. But so I was wondering if the book was going to be sort of meandering the way, and it wasn't. It felt like, it did feel like he was just telling parts of the story.
Yeah. So, and, I think, and I agree with you about him sometimes in interviews being like, I mean, he's practiced, he's been asked every single possible question you could ever ask him.
Right.
But what the book does and what the Broadway show accomplished is it stopped you from asking certain questions of him anymore.
Yes.
And so he's revealed all these secrets. He's revealed his own, personal demons. You find out all about the therapy and all of that, all these things that, maybe he wouldn't feel comfortable talking about because, of the shame that he talks about in the book, having felt, and the shame that he talks about in the Broadway show of, his own success compared to his father's, all that stuff, all that shit we deal with, right? Like, right. Men are stupid. We're so much better if we just talk about the things that bother us, but we don't.
Right.
But he went and got the therapy and he wrote it all down and he told the story. And it felt to me subsequent to that, and why I feel Letter to You is a really great album, is that he's unencumbered by the fear of his true self being known. It's known. It's out there. Yeah. So he can now go write a record that is 100% about himself and not about a character. He doesn't have to hide behind the character. We know everything now. Plus he's 71 years old,
Well, like,
and
I felt like in Western Stars, he continued that conversation. And
right.
He said there was a point, right, that if you cared about me, I was going to push you away.
Right.
Because that's good.
And it's got to be weird to be Bruce Springsteen. Like,
yes.
That's not a normal existence to be
right.
Bruce Springsteen. It's like him, Michael Jordan, and Obama. Like, what do you, anywhere in
yes.
the world that you go, like, you can't just like go get a cheeseburger. Like, you're always going to be Bruce Springsteen. And I think as an artist whose job it is to discern the world and make sense of it for our entertainment, that's a hard notion, that you can't belong to the world in that same way that you could when you were 24, 25, 26 years old, and you could really observe it. You almost have to take it from a character point of view because you don't get to have that human interaction.
Yeah.
You can't surprise a person. Like, if Bruce Springsteen walked in my house right now, I would collapse.
Yes. Yes.
Number one, I have a guard gate, so I don't know how he got in.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, I have kept you along, and I apologize, but I appreciate it so much. Is there anything I should have asked you that I haven't?
Oh gosh, I don't think so.
Okay.
I think I think my fandom though, and how it rolled into this character that I've written, this, and these books, in my new book, Below Desert, that's coming out right after this show airs. Bruce, if you're a Bruce Springsteen fan, you will actually see the influence in the stories that I tell and the books that I write, even when I'm writing about a fake Jewish hitman.
Yes.
Which is a weird thing. It's a very weird thing.
Mm-hmm. Yes, the book is The Low Desert. When is it supposed to be out?
It comes out February 2nd.
Okay. And available where all fine books can be found?
Yes, sir. Everywhere.
That is good. Okay, we want to happen that. Before I let you go, you've already talked about Jay Armstrong, but he is an honors English teacher. Every
got a lot of beef with the man. Got a lot of beef.
Oh man, we have to have a. He does. He takes 2 days of his honors English class, and they break down Thunder Road, talking about all the imagery and the themes of the song as if it was a poem, comparing it to Robert Frost. And then at the end of the 2 days in class, he asked, "Does Mary get in the car?" So, Todd, that's your question. Does Mary get in the car?
No woman is getting into a car with a man who says, "You're just all right."
Okay. My wife would agree with that statement.
No woman is like, you say that like duck if you say that to a woman. No woman wants to be told you ain't pretty, but you're all right. Like, no, you're not a beauty, but hey, you're all right. No, she doesn't get in the car. But also, in the history of these characters that we know in this world, these small town characters, she might get in the car, they might make it to the street, and then she's going to stop him, and she's going to get out, and she's going to walk back home.
I like it.
He's a loser.
Okay.
He's not going to make it. She's got something else. She's going to find a rich oil man.
Oh, I like that. Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. Thunder Road 2.
There we go. Here you go. All right. If someone wants to reach you, how can they?
You can find me anywhere by looking for my name, Todd Goldberg, at Todd Goldberg on Twitter, at Todd Goldberg on Facebook, toddgoldberg.com. Well, only one D in Todd, however. My parents didn't love me enough to give me 2. But you can find me everywhere. And of course, I also host the podcast Literary Disco, which is everywhere you get your podcasts, and is part of Lit Hub, which is a fantastic literary website that has a full radio network of different shows. But we've been doing Literary Disco for 9 years. So we've got 200 episodes out there.
And what is the premise?
It's talking about books. We read a book, we talk about it, we play some games. It's, we talk about life and culture and books and whatever weird thing happens to be happening. And it's, if you're a fan of TV shows from the 90s, former child actor Ryder Strong is a co-host. So sometimes you also get a little, when I was on Boy Meets World, ... And that's always fun to talk about. But it's 3 people, me, Ryder, Julia Pistel. We all went to graduate school together, and we've been having a continuing conversation about books the entire time. And so we decided at the dawn of the podcast era that people would be interested in what we have to say, and it turns out inexplicably that they are.
I will have to check that out. That sounds good. This has been a joy for me. I hope you've had fun.
It's great. I could do it every night.
I guess we could. I don't think we'd run out of topics. Thank you, Todd. I hope everyone goes and checks out the book, and certainly check out the podcast. Listeners, you please be safe. Remember to social distance, wash your hands. As Bruce says, wear an effing mask. And let's all be good to each other, because we certainly need it. But for now, we will talk to you soon. Goodbye. Doing a podcast at times can be a one-way conversation, and I hate that. So please let me know what you like and don't like about the work I'm doing. You can reach the podcast via email at setlistingbruce@gmail.com. The show is on Twitter at setlistingbruce, and my personal Twitter is at jessejacksondfw. We have a website, www.setlistingbruce.com. From there, you can find links to other Springsteen podcasts, as well as other music-themed podcasts. We have a page devoted to our own SLB All-Star Band. These are guests who have been on the podcast more than 3 times. There is a link to our store where you can purchase Set Listing Bruce shirts, as well as a Mary Question t-shirt. There is a link to our Patreon page where you can sign up to help support the podcast financially. We have different levels and different rewards based on your support. If you don't have any extra cash, and right now, who does, you can support the podcast by subscribing via your favorite podcast player and leaving us a review. The more reviews we have, the easier it is for people to find us. And please tell a friend about the podcast, especially if they love Bruce or music, because it will make a difference.
You just heard the fun-talking, hard rockin', music loving, album ranking, fan thinking, joy spreading, lyric reading, story sharing podcast that is the one, the only Set Listing Bruce. Set Listing Bruce is part of the Southgate Media podcast group. The theme for Set Listing Bruce was written by David Rosen, used by permission.
And there we go. That's the show.
Perfect. That was great.
Well, thanks. You were wonderful.
Happy to do it anytime. Every time I have a new book, I'm coming back to talk about Bruce.